So this is the iPhone 11, the cheapest new iPhone you can buy from Apple in 2022, especially if you want a new, notched, and relatively cheap iPhone. However, on the used side of things, for often slightly less, you can get the better screened flagship of the previous year, the iPhone XS. So, which of these two phones should you personally get in 2022 and why? Well, first of all, as usual, we're going to be talking about the specs. The iPhone XS features an Apple A12 Bionic processor, whereas the iPhone 11 features an A13 Bionic processor, which actually did bring along some cool changes, especially with the processing and the camera performance. Both phones feature 4GB of RAM, variable storage options with the iPhone XS having 64, 256, and 512GB, whereas the iPhone 11 comes in with that same 64GB option, but also a 128GB middle ground, and capping out at 256GB, so less than the iPhone XS if that matters to you. However, I always go with the minimum possible storage option, and I've never had a problem with either, so take that for what you will. The iPhone XS weighs in 177 grams, whereas the iPhone 11 weighs in a heavier 194 grams. Finally, in terms of color, the iPhone XS comes in black, white, and my personal favorite, gold. The iPhone 11, however, comes in black, green, yellow, purple, red, and white. As for the specs, well, that's pretty much it. If you're new around here, I like to keep this section short. Next up, we have build quality, design, and button layout. Both phones are of a similar design era, however, there are a few differences between them, especially when it comes to the build quality. While both phones do feature that notched design with rounded off edges and a dual camera configuration, on the iPhone XS, instead of getting a glass front and back with an aluminium bezel, you get a stainless steel bezel instead. To be honest, the design on both of these phones is top notch. Both phones look and feel super premium, and despite the fact that these aren't the newest phones on the market by any stretch of the imagination, from a pure design point, they both feel excellent. In terms of button layout, both feature separate volume up and down buttons, an isolated lock button, and a mute switch. In terms of build quality, both also do feature an IP68 water resistance rating, which is helpful if you get your phone wet when you're coming out of the shower, as it means you do have an extra layer of protection. However, unfortunately, on these generations of iPhones, neither do have ceramic shield technology, which means you'll probably want to keep them in a case, because breaking a glass iPhone, not a pleasant repair bill. As for the build quality and button layout, both look and feel really premium. The buttons are all nice and tactile, and they have a very similar design, to be totally honest. So this section really does just come down to what you personally prefer. After this, we have the screen. The iPhone XS features a 5.8-inch OLED panel with a resolution of 1125 by 2436, and it looks absolutely phenomenal. I've always really liked the iPhone OLED screens. The contrast just looks absolutely incredible, and with a screen of this size, you get a really nice PPI to the point where you can't really see any individual pixels. Going over to the iPhone 11, we get a 6.1-inch LCD screen this time, with a resolution of 828 by 1792, and to be honest, in 2022, this does look a little bit dated. I have actually heard a lot of people say they do prefer LCD screens due to the fact that OLED screens give them headaches. However, I've never personally had any of those mentioned issues, and if I was personally choosing, OLED, hands down. Both phones also do feature True Tone, which is nice, and a secondary interaction method. On the iPhone XS, we get the older pressure-based 3D touch, and on the iPhone 11, we get the newer time-based haptic touch. To be honest, software has almost entirely bridged the two of these now, and both work great on each, so again, it's really down to personal preference. Okay, so to summarize, I do think the iPhone XS does have the better screen here. It's a size I personally prefer, with a higher resolution, better contrast levels, and so yeah, I do just personally prefer it. Following on, we have Face ID, and seeing as both of these phones are notched, this is the main unlock method. While a great improvement from the iPhone X at the time, the iPhone XS really isn't anything to write home about. However, the iPhone 11 is where we first saw a real improvement on the iPhone side of things when it came to Face ID. I remember this was one of the first things I noticed when I initially tried out the iPhone 11. The Face ID was noticeably faster and worked on a much wider variety of angles. Honestly, this is an incredibly underrated feature, especially due to the number of applications that you would use Face ID for in everyday life. However, as long as you do get a good look at the sensor, the iPhone XS will be nice and fast, just not as fast as on the iPhone 11, so a definitive victory here. here. Up next, we have the ever important cameras. As I said in the design section of this video, both phones do feature that dual camera system. However, they are vastly different under the hood. The iPhone XS features a pair of 12 megapixel cameras with an f1.8 wide angle and an f2.4 telephoto lens. Also, it has a 7 megapixel f2.2 front facing camera, which is less impressive than on the iPhone 11 to be totally honest. Speaking of the iPhone 11, it again has a pair of 12 megapixel cameras, again with an f1.8 wide angle. Instead of having a telephoto lens, we got an f2.4 ultra wide lens, which is an interesting difference between these two. Again, we do have a front facing camera here, only this time it got an upgrade to 12 megapixels, but again it has that same f2.2 aperture. In terms of actual performance, they do both take really nice looking photos. The colors and dynamic range do look very nice on the iPhone XS, also providing a good amount of detail and sharpness. That said though, it is clear that the iPhone 11 had better processing under the hood, as we get more dynamic range and more sharpness. In terms of differing angles, I personally really like the telephoto on the iPhone XS. I've always found it to be a really good creative angle, and it helps you get closer. I don't remember who said it, but there is an old saying, if your photo sucks, move closer. Or something like that. The ultra-wide on the iPhone 11, however, provided a totally new perspective. And while there is occasionally some distortions in the edges, it is a brilliant angle for getting some really creative shots. Both feature portrait mode, which is nice for getting that blurry background without lugging around a DSLR. However, you can use it on the wide angle on the iPhone 11, whereas you need to use it in the telephoto on the iPhone XS. The iPhone 11 also has another thing the iPhone XS doesn't have, in the form of night mode. I've always been a big fan of night mode. It was one of my favorite features on the iPhone 11 upon release, and even in 2022, while it is only available on the wide angle compared to the newer offerings, which made night mode available on all angles, it is a fantastically useful technology that, again, I am a huge fan of. Selfies also do just look better on the iPhone 11. Again, you get better dynamic range and sharpness, and a significant increase on the megapixels front. Although, let's be honest, selfies don't need to be in the best quality, and to be honest, I can't complain with either. That said though, the iPhone 11 is blatantly better. In terms of video, both phones do shoot in 4K at 60 FPS. However, again, the dynamic range and colors are just a bit better on the iPhone 11 side of things. That said though, for just some casual filming, both do an excellent job. Both also offer slow motion in 1080p at up to 240 FPS, and here the difference narrows a little bit because, again, even to this day, slow motion just isn't that great on phones. But again, the iPhone 11 does just narrowly pull ahead here. A big upgrade to the iPhone 11 though was the fact that the front-facing camera can now shoot in 4K at up to 60 FPS, whereas this wasn't an option on the iPhone XS, being capped at 1080p. So if this is a big concern for you, definitely go with the iPhone 11. Overall, while I do still personally prefer a telephoto lens to an ultra-wide lens, it is clear that the iPhone 11 does have the better camera here. Both do a nice job for some casual photos and videos, but I have consistently found that the dynamic range and sharpness are just better on the iPhone 11 side of things. So if this is a big thing for you and you don't mind giving up telephoto, then the iPhone 11 is definitely the better buy here. Following on, we have the most important aspect of the modern smartphone: OS and app performance. In terms of the operating system, both phones are running iOS 15. However, it is worth noting that the iPhone 11 was released a year after the iPhone XS. Therefore, it is likely that it will last longer in terms of support. As of now though, both will run iOS 16, so there is some level of future-proofing on both, although chances are, again, you will get slightly more support with the iPhone 11. In terms of operating system performance, scrolling through the OS, opening up stock apps, and performing system functions work very well on both. In terms of more intensive performance though, I do have to give the edge to the iPhone 11. I do think that watching 4K videos is fantastic on both. In fact, I actually preferred it on the iPhone XS due to the fact that the screen is better, and I've had no problems with either in that regard. In terms of gaming though, while both do work pretty well for some casual gaming, I do definitely think the A13 processor does give the iPhone 11 an edge here. Overall, while both are still performing pretty well at the moment, my money is definitely on the iPhone 11 staying good for longer. Not only is it not going to have to drive that super high resolution screen, but also it's newer. So if you want to get one that's gonna last the longest, definitely go with the iPhone 7. Quickly, going back to the hardware, we have these speakers. In terms of speakers, obviously both phones do feature that stereo technology that we saw introduced on the iPhone 7. However, I do think the iPhone 11 is slightly louder and better quality than the iPhone XS. That said though, both will do just fine for some casual listening, and whenever I'm watching a video on one of these phones, I never find myself needing to plug in an external pair of headphones. Like, the internal speakers will just get the job done, which is kind of what you want. And finally, as always, we have the battery life. I'm not going to make you hold your breath here. The iPhone 11 is just better. In fact, one of the things that initially puzzled me about the iPhone XS is the fact that it had a smaller battery than the iPhone X. Now, I know the A12 processor was more efficient than the A11 processor, so in theory, you can get away with less, but I'm not really sure why anybody would want to do this. While I personally don't have any issues getting through my day with this phone, chances are if you are a heavier user than I am, you will find yourself plugging this thing in during the day. That said though, while the iPhone 11 isn't as impressive as it was when it was released, which was very impressive, seriously, I could get like 2 days of battery life out of that thing when it was released, on the model I have, all these years later, it still gets me through the day, which I'm pretty impressed with, especially due to the nature of lithium-ion batteries. Yeah, it is a pretty clean sweep here. Overall, in my opinion, the iPhone 11 is probably the smarter choice in 2022. It's newer, it has a better camera, better battery life, and you can still buy it new. That said though, it's not my favorite. In fact, I very much prefer the iPhone XS. I prefer the form factor, I prefer the screen, I prefer the telephoto lens, and to be honest, I can plug it in during the day, so I'm not too bothered if this thing runs out of battery. Again, a lot of this is down to personal preference, and at the end of the day, it's your call as to which phone you personally want to buy. That said though, I hope I've helped steer you in the right direction. Alright guys, so that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Let me know, by the way, which of these phones do you prefer? Do you prefer the iPhone XS? Do you prefer the iPhone 11? Do you prefer something different entirely? Feel free to let me know in the comments. I always enjoy reading those. Once again, a huge thank you to anyone who has joined as a channel member. As for now though, as always, thank you for watching. Remember to like the video if you want to see more content like this, and smash that subscribe button. I'm done for now, and I will see you guys in the next one.